Hello again, ABS 470 online students. Professor Jared Rathel here, and I wanted to start by thanking you for rejoining me for lecture 1.2. So today I pose the question, why even bother studying mammals? And I'm going to make the argument that although they are few in number relative to like arthropods in the system, they can have highly influential roles in structuring ecological communities. We're dependent upon mammals for food, for dairy, for fiber, for biomedical models. Next, if we ignore the impacts of the mammals around us, I believe we do so at our own peril. And then lastly, we're mammals. So my biggest hope for you in taking this class is that you have a richer understanding of Homo sapiens, of what we are and where we come from. So the first big idea that I want you to gather from this lecture is that mammals, although their populations are considerably smaller than other life forms in the ecosystem like plants or invertebrates, they're going to form these critical links in both terrestrial and aquatic systems, like you can see here. So for example, African elephants, by knocking over some trees and then denuding others of leaves and branches, they're going to maintain the grasslands within which they live by keeping the trees at bay and the savanna open. Further, elephants are going to eat copious amounts of food and then drop large bombs, like you can see on the left. But that elephant feces is incredibly nutrient rich, okay? And they're going to drop it sometimes kilometers, tens of kilometers from where they consumed it. So it's an important part in the cycling of nutrients. And there's been good evidence that suggests when elephants are present in African savannas, as well as in Southeast Asia, they're going to structure plant communities. Similarly, the presence of prairie dogs right here in the desert Southwest is associated with communities with higher plant biodiversity. And then finally on the bottom right here, when whales, massive whales, die and the carcasses sink to the seafloor, they're going to provide this ecological succession, this feeding bonanza for ratfish and hagfish and deep water sharks. So we're going to return to community ecology, specifically keystone species, like the sea otter here that's munching on sea urchins, keeping sea urchin populations in check and maintaining the health of those kelp forests. We're going to come back to sea otters and keystone species in week 6. Beavers on the right here are considered ecosystem engineers. So by slowing rivers down with their dams, they create these vital wetlands. They create habitat for fish and aquatic macroinvertebrates, amphibians. The insects they become really abundant in all of those snags right around the wetlands. And so again, we're returning to a community ecology. Trust me, it's fun at a later date. Which brings us to Canis lupus here on the bottom left, and Cervus elaphus, the gray wolf and the elk of Yellowstone National Park, and your first discussion prompt. So gray wolves were part of the natural ecosystem in Yellowstone National Park, but were deliberately exterminated there, as well as throughout much of the contiguous 48 states in the 1920s. You guys probably know the story. They were trapped, they were poisoned, they would pup, where they go in and kill the pups in the den. So my question to you is, how would you expect this extermination, this removal, to affect ecosystem functions? So I want your initial discussion response, your comments, to be concise, like peer-reviewed journals. That's the style we're aiming for. They need to be less than 300 words. They need to describe your conclusions, present the evidence or reasoning involved that helped you get to that end point. And lastly, I want a sentence or two connecting your conclusions to content in this course, either from these lectures or from your textbook readings or your activities. And then you'll be randomly assigned a colleague's discussion post. And in less than 200 words, I want you to tell them in a response what you liked, what they've done well, feedback on what they may have missed or maybe didn't elaborate well on, didn't express well, and then anything you may have learned in reading their post. So before you complete your initial post, don't forget to check out the resources that are on Canvas, including an amazing video. It's been remastered. It's called How Wolves Change Rivers, as well as the famed or infamous Ripple and Bichetta. It's often cited publication in biological conservation. So obviously, many of us are dependent upon mammals for meat. So think cattle, pigs, lamb. The Sami have their reindeer on the bottom right, rabbits, as well as for dairy. So again, cows, goats, wool. So think sheep and alpaca. And lastly, transportation, right? Those cowboys are riding horses. If you've gone down into the Grand Canyon or maybe Havasupai, you may have caught a ride on a mule or had a mule carry your stuff. The Bedouin in Arabia are riding on their camels. The Sami have been known to hook their reindeer up to sleds. So interestingly, it's hypothesized that goats, which were the first ungulate to be domesticated, it's thought, dogs were the first animal to be domesticated. We'll talk about them on the next slide. But the goats were, the evidence suggests that goats were domesticated about 10,000 years ago in the Zagros Mountains in what is today present-day Iran. Another interesting factoid for you. Today, an average-sized slaughterhouse in the United States will kill 1,100 pigs per hour. So obviously, mammals such as dogs and cats, ferrets, my kids both have dwarf hamsters. They've clearly become our companions, right? So we derive pleasure from spending time with these other species. An interesting study came out a few years ago that measured oxytocin levels. And so when a human companion pets his dog, both the human and the dog get a little jolt, a little spike of oxytocin, which is the feel-good, pro-social hormone. So quite frankly, I mean, let's admit it, some dogs live such a pampered existence that you have to ask, who is domesticating who? Okay, so rodents have served as an important biomedical research model for over a century now because of their anatomical, physiological, and genetic similarity to us, to humans, as well as their small size, the ease and cheapness of maintaining rodent cultures, as well as their short life cycle, and they produce lots of young. So early on, researchers were able to select and breed for certain lines that express traits associated with disease. Today, it's relatively straightforward to manipulate the mouse genome using CRISPR to model diseases caused by gene mutation. So the mus musculus, the house mouse genome, was first published in December 2002. And that brings us to your second assignment built into this lecture, your first primary literature summary. So we know that three-toed sloths carry an incredible diversity of micro and macroorganisms in their coarse outer hair. So this is all algae here growing in their hair, along with a whole bunch of microbes and protists and fungi. So conserving rainforests in Panama and Costa Rica, where these sloths are distributed, may, in the long run, be greatly beneficial to us, right? Conserving these areas is going to help us because they represent repositories for these wondrous compounds that we can exploit. So there, in this study, it talks about 50 strains of fungi that were cultured from sloth back hair, of which 20 had antibiotic properties. Okay, so I want you to read this primary literature article, and remember, when reviewing primary literature for ABS 470, I want you to focus really on that abstract, the introduction, as well as the discussion sections. Please don't get mired down in the methodologies, okay? Particularly in the statistics, okay? Again, I want your summaries to be terse and direct, just like a peer-reviewed journal, just like your discussion posts. And I've got further directions that are on Canvas. So next, I want you to recognize that mammals can be disease reservoirs or even vectors. So causing disease, transmitting diseases to us. Bats are the leading cause of rabies in the United States. Researchers in China have posited that it may have been a pangolin, a trafficked pangolin in a wet market that initially spread the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, to humans. Prions, or rogue proteins, in infected animal flesh, so consuming prions can cause rare but very serious neurodegenerative disorders in humans. And then, of course, there are the rodents. So infected fleas living on ground squirrels can vector the plague. Deer mice and cotton rats are going to shed the deadly hantavirus in their urine and feces and saliva. Furthermore, mammals can be incredibly destructive as non-native invasive species, particularly on islands. So the mongoose, which you see here on the left, with the blood red mouth there, was introduced to the Hawaiian Islands in 1872. They purposefully brought mongoose over in an attempt to control rats, invasive rats, and preserve or maximize sugarcane yields. You probably heard this story. You may know it didn't work out so well. So rats are nocturnal, mongoose are diurnal. So instead of eating rats, the mongoose primarily began voraciously consuming the eggs of ground nesting birds, as well as the birds themselves, as well as sea turtle eggs. On the right here, below right, we see a feral cat that is preying upon a native marsupial in Australia. So, of course, felids are placental mammals. They did not evolve in Australia. The only naturally occurring placental is the dingo that probably recently colonized Australia from Indonesia. So feral cats really have no business being there, and they have decimated wallaby populations. Rabbits are another huge issue in Australia. So, important idea here, to study mammalogy today is to study conservation biology. So, of the 6,500 species of modern mammals that have been identified, approximately 1 in 5 are already gone or are threatened or in danger and serious decline. So you may have seen these heart-wrenching photos on the left from National Geographic. This is Sudan, the last male northern white rhinoceros. Last male, it's a sexually reproducing species. There's 2 females left, I believe, but it essentially guarantees extinction. So rhinos have been hammered by poaching. The horns are very valuable in Chinese markets for the use in traditional medicines, which is particularly infuriating because rhino horn is made from the super abundant protein keratin, same stuff that makes up your fingernails. On the right is the vaquita, or the little sea cow, or the panda porpoise, which lives right south of us in the Sea of Cortez. This little guy is on the knife's edge of extinction, so there's probably 30 or less of them left. So if you haven't seen it already, I would highly encourage you to check out the movie Sea of Shadows. So my colleague and friend Rue Mahoney was the field director for this movie, and Leonardo DiCaprio paid for it. Anyways, it's an eye-opening film. Also, it's a tearjerker. And the final reason why we should be studying mammals is because we're mammals. So there are approximately 7.5 billion of us on planet Earth. That's billion with a B. Demographers estimate that our population will hit 9 billion in 2050 and top out at carrying capacity, let's hope, between 11 and 13 billion in 2100. So humans are now the fundamental drivers of eco-evolutionary processes on planet Earth. So much so that conservation biologists, geologists, and demographers, most of them now agree that we've left the relatively stable epoch, the Holocene, within which modern agriculture evolved, and we've entered a new epoch, the age of humans, the Anthropocene. So in short, it is a really important time to study mammalogy. Many thanks for listening to the lecture, and please reach out to me if you want to exchange emails or video conference and discuss any of these concepts in greater detail. Okay, I'll see you next time. Cheers.